Thanks for the download. Before we start this episode, it'd be great if you could rate the podcast on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from, as this helps me know how we're doing and brings it to the attention of potential listeners. One way you can support the podcast is via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. This does what it says in the tin, and for the price of a coffee you can help with the running costs of producing the pod and also buy new equipment. As we wrap up 2024, I'd like to say thanks to everybody for listening and for those who've bought a coffee to help support the pod. And finally, a shout out to Nick Beale and his company ISAR for providing technical help throughout the year as usual. At the end of November, I went on a road trip with Kev to Northern Ireland. In many respects, it was more of a battlefield tour than a road trip, and we covered areas where we'd been in operations. On this episode, we discussed the transformation of Northern Ireland since we were there in the late 80s and early 90s. With a focus on Belfast, Londonderry and South Armagh. We reflect on our past tours in Banna during the Troubles and provide comparisons between the historical and current states of those areas. We also discuss our impressions of modern-day Belfast and Derry, contrasting their war-torn pasts and exploring key landmarks like the Europa Hotel. We also travelled the roads in South Armagh and visited former military bases and discussed the region's struggle and its journey towards peace. And we saw how far Northern Ireland has come and reflect on the compromises and changes that have contributed to the peace process. Let's crack on. Alright, we're sat in Belfast tonight, and we've already done quite a few episodes on Northern Ireland in the past. First one we did was podcast 7 with Neil Hogg, and that was about a Green Army tour on Banna. And then we did podcast 44, which is about the RUC and PSNI with our guest Andy. He used to be in our unit before he went to transfer across to the police. Then we did podcast number 60, which is called Infiltrating the Provisional IRA, which was the author Henry Hemming, and that was about agents in Northern Ireland. And the last one we did was podcast 66 about the Provisional IRA's attack on the Derry Yard PVCP. Both Kev and I did tours in Northern Ireland. We've discussed them quite a bit in detail in those podcasts. But Kev, coming back here now, we drove from the port through to Belfast to the hotel, and really just what's your sort of impressions on what you're seeing compared to when you were here previously?
I think we were talking about this earlier. I've been here a couple of times with work, over day visits and such like, and I was amazed by the changes. But again, we've hit the Christmas season, the German markets are out, the crowds are out. It's a vibrant city. It looks nothing like it did in the early 90s. The atmospherics are totally different. It is a great looking city. It's been rebuilt. It's modernised. It's, as I say, thriving. It's got tourists all over the place. I mean, I've always wanted to stay at the Europa Hotel, which was one of those most famous landmarks in Belfast and was iconic during the Troubles.
And it's weird, wasn't it? Because when we were walking along to the German market, well, first of all, we had a pint across the road in a great pub called the Crown Liquor Salon, which is like a Victorian bar with these little stalls, basically, with individual tables, very private, great Victorian decoration. We're having a pint at the bar, and there's all these Spanish tourists coming through, tons of them. And then when we were walking towards the Christmas market, we're both saying to each other, we couldn't imagine soldiers patrolling along here with rifles.
No. I mean, the images of the 70s and the 80s where your British Army patrolling with SLRs, armoured vehicles, riot shields and lot. You can't picture that here today.
And just describe for listeners who might not know what the centre of Belfast was like to prevent all those bombs going off. It had a ring of steel, didn't it?
Ring of steel. There was search areas all over the place. There was a lot of places already boarded up from previous damage or to prevent damage from other explosions.
Prolific entry points, wasn't it?
Yeah, and if you look at the old footage, you'll see that where they couldn't get bombs into the city, they were on the edge of the city, and you see car bombs and other such devices going off all the time. So in the 70s and 80s, nearly into the 90s, the that was happening. They had the peace walls and all the rest of it, which are still around outside the city. But inside the city centre, it is dynamically changed. I mean, you just don't recognise it in those days.
I know his bombs are deliberate because what they were trying to do was economically wreck
absolutely
the sort of the businesses in Belfast and put people off from investing in the city.
Yeah, absolutely. But you walk the streets now, that has well and truly gone. That is definitely history. The shops are exactly the same shops you'll see everywhere else. I mean, very much it is the same as any other city.
Well, that's a good point because it looks just like any city. But I remember my first tour here. One of the things that threw me was it was a really strange feeling because even back then, even though it was poorer, walking along a street which could be your own high street with a rifle was quite an unsettling experience as well.
Yeah, I think there was a dissipation of expectations when you got here and you took your time to get used to it. And then by the time you got used to that, obviously you left and you went back to your barracks in Germany or in the UK. But I think from how I saw it because I was in Belfast in the early 90s, and how I remember Belfast then to how it is now is worlds apart. There's no doubt. 30 years has made such a difference. And the people are very different.
And Kev's ambition, he bugged me to come and stay here. Me being a tight jock, I didn't want to stay in Europa, but we got a good deal, which was happy for me. I think Europa really sums up the fortunes of Northern Ireland in some respects. It was opened in 1971, just a couple of years after the Troubles started. It was known as the most bombed hotel in the world, and it was bombed 33 times between 1970 and 1994. And it was taken into receivership in 1993. And at the time, it was hard to believe that Northern Ireland would become a tourist destination. And after an £8 million refurbishment, it opened in 1994. And it really is a symbol of Belfast's transformation and survival. And it was a bit, wasn't it, like that hotel in Sarajevo? Because this is where all
exactly. I think it is one of the symbols, because obviously all the journalists stayed here during the Troubles. This was the place everyone came to, but it was also the place that got attacked various amounts of times. But it is something that it survived the Troubles. It's thrived massively. I mean, it is a symbol, and I think
iconic in some respect.
I think so, and that's why I wanted to stay here, because it is one of those places. I've been here before for a coffee, but I never stayed here. But I wanted to get in here because I think it's one of those places. If we've got a bucket list of places, this is definitely on that sort of bucket list. But it just shows the difference between the 80s and 90s that I remember on tours over here to 2024, what Belfast has turned into. And I think you can't underestimate the difference. And it's hard to imagine what it's going to look like in 10 years' time, because it's only going to get more cosmopolitan.
Yeah. But old habits die hard. And we got a contact in the army to get in touch with a contact in the PSNI just to see what the situation would be like. And we told them where we were thinking of going, and we got suitable advice off them. And it's funny, when you look at the tourist information on the internet, you can Google things like, is it okay to go to the Shankill Road? Is it okay to the Falls Road? And a lot of them saying, yeah, you still need to be careful. It's like any big city. You still have to be careful in these areas after dark, and don't be obvious about what you're doing.
Yeah, but I think that's something that takes more than one or two generations to change and to gentrify that area, and to put the economics into the area, knock down some of the old, let's call them symbols, that maybe hold people back. But by the new generation coming through, and the thing we talked about is they're more interested in buying a house than blowing one up.
You had to get that line in because I love that line.
Absolutely, but they are, because they're like everyone else. They want somewhere to live. They want a really good job.
They
want great holidays. They want a nice car. They want a life.
And we said, people, after we walked through that city centre tonight with everyone there, we turned around and said to each other, there's no way that people would allow it to go back. There's no way they'd allow it. Well, you'd hope so.
No, I don't think you can, because I think the mindset of the people, they want German markets. They want nice shops.
They want a normal life.
They want a normal life. And there may be pockets that would go back slightly, small areas, which would be the same as if you go to any big city or whatever in the UK and you have a rough area or high crime area. But I don't believe that you'd ever have the will or the populace getting behind some of these extreme groups to the same level anymore.
I think we've also got to be prepared to put our own prejudices to the side.
Massively.
This is the third time I've been back, and first time I came back was about 12 years ago in business. I came back in the summer because we did the Wild Atlantic Way down in Southern Ireland, and we were getting the ferry back, and we were talking to a couple who, British people, first time in the north, and they had just done they told us they were going to do a black cab tour, and I said there was no way I'd do a black cab tour because black cabs are associated with the IRA.
Yeah.
And then we met them later that day to have a drink with them, and they were saying they did the black cab tour, and they couldn't tell if the guy was Catholic or Protestant, and at the end of it, the guy said to him, "What religion am I?" And they didn't know from his tour if he had any sort of prejudices. Now, he might be hiding them or whatever, but I think the point to take away from that is he was not trying to put across any propaganda. He was saying that they are vetted and all the rest of it, that they give a fair and unpartisan account of the trouble. So I found that quite interesting. But whether I could bite into that or not, I don't know. My prejudices are still there.
Yeah, because we are of the other generation. We're not the generation that's going to be the next generation that changes another step forward. We're seeing the changes.
Yeah.
But our experiences are locked in the 80s.
We've been informed.
And the people that live on the Shankill Road or live on the Falls Road that still have their own prejudices, we're in the same cycle. We're slowly getting better, I imagine. Some faster than others. Some people never will. But the next generation are looking more forward, and their experiences of that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
If you were born in the 90s,
you don't know the trouble.
You don't know the troubles. You don't know the hardships. You don't know the strife. You don't know the struggles on both sides of the community. You don't understand the horrors that people experience.
And that phrase we've often used in the podcast, a flawed piece is better than no piece.
Oh, well,
you just see it out there tonight, don't you?
I dare say it. It doesn't look that flawed to me because it looks
prosperous, yeah.
It looks really, if you're coming in on a holiday, you're not going to be disappointed.
No.
And to be honest, the few areas you wouldn't go to are probably the areas that if you went to London, I wouldn't go to certain areas in London.
Yeah, or any big city.
Any big city. If I go to Edinburgh, I can go to all the beautiful parts, but there are certain estates I would never go to.
Yeah.
So actually, there's no difference. But actually, because of my historical sort of references, now looking at today, Belfast is...
And did you get a couple on a...
No,
travels.
I have seen no police at all.
Which is really, that's another sign, isn't it?
I've seen less police here. In fact, I haven't seen any police. I see more police in my home city or in other cities too.
Which is
unbelievable. I haven't seen a police car go past.
Yeah. No hotspurs.
I've seen not any car, and I've seen no police on the street.
Yeah,
walking around, even around the market.
I know there was nothing. It's quite that was one of the big things.
There's more policing in the cities on the mainland than there is in Belfast.
So we're essentially here for what is this? Yes, it's a battlefield tour, but just again to give listeners a bit of an eyesight. I did 2 tours. I did one in 88, 89 in Londonderry, and at the time the tours were 4.5 months long. But we got extended. We were sent down to South Armagh. We operated out of Besbrook, and the reason for that was we had to take part in an operation called Tantalus, which was a refurbishment of all the golf towers. So we essentially spent about 4 or 5 weeks in cordon positions, looking over a main supply route known as an MSR, where they took all these materials into these watchtowers, which were strung along the border and at various advantage points with some very high-tech observation kit for the day, and they were all getting refurbished and done out. So that's why we were there. And then just before the ceasefire, or just as the ceasefire was breaking, I did another 6-month tour in Keady, which is a bit strange because nobody was trusting anything, but we had to have a softer profile. So that was quite a difficult tour in a lot of respects. Kev, just give it an overview of your...
Yeah, I did 2 tours. My first tour was in Armagh. I think it was the 4.5 month tour, but we got retasked, and we went to Derry, Londonderry, however you want to call it, this week. And I went and finished off. I did 2.5 months there. So we joined in, we became part of the infantry company that was based inside the city.
You operated out of Fort Jaws, like
yeah.
Because we came around about 2 tours after you, I think.
You come around because we set it up, because we were the first gunner unit as well, to move to support the Women's Infantry Battalion, because they had one company in the city at any one time. So we went in as the subunit was broken into platoons, and we had one platoon per company, and we took over on that. And that was an eye-opener, because it was total different to... So I did Armagh, I did South Armagh, we did Tyrone as well, and some other places based out of Armagh City. And that was quite interesting, because it was a mixture of small cities, small towns, and a lot of rural. Then we hit the city, and we just got thrown into city patrols every single day. Mike Echoes, some military escorts to the IUC as it was. So we just absolutely got, I'm going to say, it was really busy, because they needed that reinforcement. And once we arrived, we didn't have no time to settle in. We were straight into it. And it was a very, very busy 2.5 months to finish our tour. And then I did a second tour in the early 90s in Belfast. So I was based up near the New Lodge, went around the Ardoyne, went down the Shankill and a few other places. And again, Belfast was a very different tour, but it was again a city tour. Very fast paced, a lot of stuff was going on. It was the early 90s, very, very busy. And I think it totally different from the earlier tour, because the people in Belfast are very different from the people in Armagh and they are to Derry. They're all very different. They've all got their own sort of personalities and their own sort of
dynamic with
and their own viewpoint and everything. So Belfast is very different. Belfast, what I remember, doesn't look anything like it is today. I didn't get into the city centre much, because most of my work was around the edges, but you could see the city centre and you knew what was going on. Obviously, there's a number of explosions and bombs and such like shootings. It was a very busy period, not just with the IRA, but also with the loyalist gangs as well, doing their stuff, because they were as very much as active as the Provisional IRA was. And so it was very, very dynamic, because you had two factions you were working against, not just one.
Yeah. So we've got a busy itinerary, which you've kindly sorted out for us, Kev.
Apparently so, yeah. On the
hotel booking. I booked the ferry, mate. Come on.
That was really difficult.
But so you just give people an overview of the itinerary we're going to have, and at each place we go to, we're going to try and record a little couple of thoughts in each one, and then we'll put it all together as a podcast. But just give an overview.
Yeah, we're doing tomorrow. We're doing a little bit more this stuff. Yeah, the Belfast piece, because you want to see the changes. So obviously the Titanic Museum, because that wasn't around when I was around, and that is a massive worldwide draw, and rightly so. I was disappointed that the shipbuilding in Northern Ireland was stopped. Yeah, just like Scotland, it was one of the most famous shipyards and built some of the finest vessels ever, and we've lost that skill. And we were talking about this in the pub, because some of the pubs, you look at the decor and the detail they put into it, because there was craftsmen all over the city.
Well, it was whiskey, it was cigarettes as well. There was
everything, but they were building ships with craftsmen, and those craftsmen had skills which were used to build great public buildings, bars, pubs, and everything else. And we've sort of lost that, which is, I think, an immense shame, because we did build some of the finest things in the world. And then we're going to go and spend a couple of days in the city of Derry, Londonderry.
Very good, mate.
Yeah. I just get.
And we're hoping to walk the ground and
very much so. It is a walking city. What does surprise everyone, and I think people forget this, is how small Belfast is and how small Derry is. And we're going to go to Armagh City, and Armagh City is tiny in comparison to, let's say, the mainland and some of the big cities there. But we're going to go there because you can walk the wall in an hour or so. None of it's a real far walk. And go to the usual, or the monuments that you see around that everyone is aware of. Obviously, there's new ones now, like the Derry Girls. I think that's very serious as well. But we're going to go see the Derry Girls. The Peace Bridge, which wasn't there, obviously, when I was there. Some areas have gone now. The Rossville Flats was during my tour, but not during Collins, and that was a rough part of the town. And
I reckon we're going to have trouble orientating ourselves.
No,
you reckon?
Potentially we might have, because the box site has changed completely now. There's a lot of new builds. There's a lot of wealth that's been put into it. They've kept a couple of the old areas, but I think apart from the Free Derry War, I think most of the other stuff will go because it has to go, because it's just too old and you need to move forward. And you'll keep some momentum and memorials because you need to for historical references.
Yeah, because you can't. You're saying somebody born at the start of the peace process, they need to know.
They need to see this because they need to understand where it started, how it started, and where
and the danger of going back.
Absolutely, because history is the great teacher as well, and you've got to remember your history to stop making the same mistakes again and again. But I've done, when I was looking for hotels and such like in the city, inside the wall, that seems to have changed massively. There's a lot of money being poured in. A lot of the buildings are now being done up, and there's some beautiful hotels. And some of the old buildings that were a little bit run down have now been converted into various shops, bars, pubs, and accommodation, and look stunning. So I imagine that's going to look very different to how we remember it. Some of the outlying estates will still be the same, but they're not the sort of places that they're going to change overnight. They will be the last places that ever change, because the people in there, you can only gentrify slowly, and also when you gentrify, where are people going to go and live? And also you got to be careful, because there are communities there, and if you gentrify too much, you drive the communities out, you destroy those communities, and that causes a problem there. It brings more uncertainty for those individuals who may have lived in the Creggan or somewhere else 40, 50 years, second, third generation. And when you drive them out, where they're going to go, and it's not fair to them either. So it's slow gentrifying, but the city area looks totally different. We were talking about this, about the Strand Road and Strand Road Police Station. It used to be on the main road. It doesn't look like the main road. It looks like another road has been...
Yeah, that's what we're looking at Google Maps, trying to orientate ourselves, aren't we?
And it looks different. So where Fort George is just wasteland now, which would have been sold off because it's in part of the docks. So there's going to be a lot of change, and it'll be interesting to see those changes. But it'll be interesting to see the dynamics inside the city, because I think the city, if it's thriving as Belfast is, then it's changed. If it's bringing more and more tourists in, it's massively changed. And there is a big drive for tourists into these places.
Well, I noticed that Londonderry has got a first-generation Nigerian female mayor, which I would never have thought would have happened.
But that's, again, only been 30-odd years.
Yeah, something like that. You say only, but it's amazing the changes. So, where are we going after that then?
But then we're going to go and do a little bit around Armagh City and around those little areas.
Desbrook,
Keady, Besbrook Mill, and a few other places. We just
Pint down Crossmaglen.
No, that be so.
Fort Kill.
There's going to be a few places we'll go to. Some places it's probably, again, in the same way, maybe some of our prejudice not to go to these places, because some of the people there have got the same prejudice they had 30 years ago, because they haven't moved, because their town hasn't evolved, it hasn't got bigger, and people live in the same town for the whole.
There's a lot of scars in those places as well.
And there's, like you say, there's a lot of scars, but there's a lot of, we haven't moved nowhere, so their train of thought hasn't moved on, it hasn't evolved as quickly. And the next generations in those sort of little market towns tend to move to the cities to work, or elsewhere, or obviously the UK, or obviously Europe, or into America.
But again, for listeners who might not know, South Armagh was an absolute...
bandit country.
But as it's called, bandit country. It was very hard to penetrate the IRA ASUs there.
Yeah.
Some of the hardest ASUs came out of that location. So, it was...
Yeah, I mean, they would gladly take on a fortified area with an ASU.
Yeah.
And they did. That's hence why your operation was to go and reinforce and reinvigorate them, because the ASUs were quite happy to take them on.
Yeah.
And I think people forget how militarised some of those areas were, and the provisional IRA in those places were as good as fieldcraft as most people, and were quite happy to get into a firefight. Yeah. But it wasn't a firefight in the same way some of the cities are, where they fire 1 or 2 rounds and then scoot. This was more sustained. this is more of a fight, and you have to call for reinforcements. But to get reinforcements out there was always difficult. And eventually, Bandit Country became a place where you can only move on helicopters.
Yeah. So that's really the itinerary next few days. And as I said already, we'll drop off little episodes as we're going along. Quick reminder, though, that we've got 4 other episodes out there that I reeled off at the start to get your teeth into and get an idea of what it's like to be a soldier on Op Bana, a policeman, and even an agent handler, because we covered a little bit about that as well. And the effectiveness of the IRA, the Provisional IRA, was talked about in podcast 66 when they did that deliberate attack on a fortified fixed army position. So we're going to go for some scoff now, so we'll tune in and drop a couple more thoughts along the way later on. Okay, so we arrived in Londonderry last night after a bit of Kev's navigational errors.
The driver is unable to spin 2 plates. In fact, the driver's unable to spin 1 plate.
The Peace Bridge was built to link the 2 communities and a sign of the sort of peace process. So we're on the Ebreton side, and for people who did a tour here, they'll remember Ebreton Barracks, which is now a concert venue and local gathering place. And we're staying at a hotel on Shipquay Street, a really nice hotel. And I remember Shipquay Street as, and I think I'm right here, and guys are on tour with me, might correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember that one of our call signs got hit by an IED in Shipquay Street. So it's quite weird being in the hotel when you can remember things like that.
But I think it's fair to say that the whole city, just like we did in Belfast, is unrecognisable.
Oh, absolutely.
Unrecognisable. The buildings, the upgrades, the new builds, the gentrification inside the city walls, unbelievable.
And we went for a walk up the city walls last night, and it was quite weird. And in contrast to Belfast in some respects, where we walked to the Crumlin Road, and you had all the sort of sectarian murals on the walls down at the bottom of the Shankill, the first mural we saw in this city was the Undertones one.
Yes. Yeah, it's definitely one that embraced the peace process, or so it seems so far. But I'm just surprised by the rebuild. I'm surprised how clean the place looks. How it looked, and we talked about it last night. It looks more regenerated than Belfast.
Well, I think as well, we come here with, well, I certainly come here with some prejudices. Belfast didn't really mean to me because I didn't do a tour there because you did. But in our tour here, and actually I arrived here 36 years ago, round about this time, because we deployed in the late November or early December. I can't remember which. But my tour is marked through those prejudices we talked about, because we had 2 guys killed, 2 who are friends of ours, and several others with that euphemism that we always use nowadays called life-changing injuries. So I'll always view a place like this through those experiences. And as you said to me in Belfast, we need to move on maybe perhaps more than some of the locals.
Yeah, I think we see history in snapshot of each location. We see it when we were there. We don't see the developments, the changes and all that sort of stuff. And we talk about this about post-Second World War, massive war against the Germans, becoming the army of occupation, very soon became allies, soldiers out there in the late 40s, early 50s were then marrying German girls. 1955, Germany became part of NATO. And perhaps sometimes the legacy of Northern Ireland is longer because you have a snapshot. You don't go back. You don't see the changes, the improvements. And actually, the generations, the people in Belfast and Derry today are not the same as we were running around in the 70s and 80s.
Well, at Barman last night, we had a good crack with Barman last night, and we said to him, we're talking about Derry girls.
Yeah.
Because to me, Derry girls is quite it shone a different light on Londonderry.
Yeah.
And we talked to him last night, and he said, never seen an episode. No. I'm married to a Derry girl. Why would I want to watch them?
It? But I think there is always a danger that we look back on the Troubles with that moment of time. We don't see the changes. And that's probably the norm for everybody. The people that live here have seen massive changes there'll always be the diehards, but, they're getting smaller and smaller in number. They'll die off. The generations will, in 20 years' time, the Troubles will seem like a very distant thing, in the same way that we look at the Second World War career and everywhere else in distance. And I think that's a good thing, because you can't keep holding on to the past.
Well, if you measure that, what you're saying there, so when I came here in 88, it's not that far from time from the end of the Second World War, between that, those sort of distances in time, as you mentioned.
That's it, and like I say, there were soldiers that fought in the Second World War. They stayed in the armed forces. They went posted back out to Germany. They became part of the occupation force. They moved to the sort of NATO footprint as the Cold War developed and evolved. And they were marrying West German girl. Those families potentially would have been fighting against British and the Allies.
Another thing, again, probably it surprised me, but perhaps it shouldn't. But there's plenty of English plates kicking about, and you hear plenty of English accents as you're talking about. Nobody seems to bat an eyelid.
No, it's totally changed. And I think that's the problem.
We still think in the terms
I'm still
of the
thinking
trouble.
1988 when I was here last, and I've got to start thinking it's 2024.
Yeah,
and everything else has changed apart from me.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah. So we're walking along this path on the Everton side towards the Foyle Bridge. And I remember the Foyle Bridge because that was the three bridges now in Londonderry. There's the Foyle Bridge, the Peace Bridge, and the Craigavon Bridge. And we used to do a lot of VCPs in the Craigavon Bridge, but the Foyle Bridge was the one that we came over because we flew in from Germany. We flew to Aldergrove. We got a Chinook from Aldergrove to Everton Barracks, and then they loaded us in CMVs, covert military vehicles, which to me just looked like a Blue Bedford truck.
Yeah.
No ammunition, 30 guys in the back of this sort of removal van type thing.
Yeah.
And they drove us to Fort George. Was your arrival quite similar?
I was in Armagh, so we did a furniture truck from Aldergrove to Armagh City. Again, I'm not sure how covert they were. I'm sure everyone knew what the removal truck in the middle of the night was doing. But to get up here, we used all sorts of just different transport because it was just one subunit moving back up to here, take over in Fort George. I think we were staggered as well because we were reinforcing the battalion base at Waterside and Edmonton Barracks. So we were thickening their footprints. And they were already in Fort George, but nowhere near the numbers that we were. So we crowded into that location. So it was a tight accommodation anyway. And obviously when we turned up, it became a little bit more snug. And the facilities could really, really struggle to handle another 120 soldiers.
So we're walking up the Foyle Bridge, we're across the Foyle Bridge, which was a notorious suicide spot as well. And one of the other duties we had to do was go look for suicides that had jumped off the bridge, which was never pleasant. And I've just dropped my notebook.
Look, it's a small one.
And then we'll go across Foyle Bridge. And then we're going to go to the site of what was Fort George, but is now a derelict wasteland. So once we get there, we'll take off and start the conversation again. Okay, so we've just walked across the Foyle Bridge, past some very nice properties. How much do you reckon?
Oh, well, in the UK, it may not be over millions.
Yeah.
I suspect there are millions over here.
Yeah, they're
I mean, they are stunning.
We're walking along a nice park sort of area along the banks of the Foyle towards Fort George. And the only way we recognised Fort George last night was a map recce on Google Maps, and we recognised the quay and the roundabout, because when you came out of the base, you could turn left into the city, go right towards the Foyle Bridge, or if you went straight over the roundabout, it took you to one of the permanent vehicle checkpoints.
Yeah. I mean, it's changed massively. I mean, I don't remember any of this This would have just been waste ground, but they've turned it into like a riverside walk. Beautiful looking.
Well kept, no litter of
again, I think we said this earlier. I have not seen any rubbish anywhere. Not a piece. Absolutely spotless.
So when you ride at Fort George then, I think we did roughly the same rotations you did. I think you did 7 days. I think we did 10 days. We did 10 days city patrols and camp security, 10 days in the permanent vehicle checkpoints, and we did 10 days rural. Was that roughly what yours was?
Well, I think we were doing 7s because we were the first lot in. There's a lot of fudge and find. So each of us got, I think it was, we were broken into 3 platoons, as always, to support the rural company and the city company. You spent one platoon would go up to the rural area, and we did like a week on rural patrols. One would spend a week at the PVCPs, and then one would do the city as well as Fort George. Like all these things, because there was another unit that took over from us, and they would have changed the rota. So they sort of
broadly similar.
Yeah, I mean it was all roughly a third in each of the sort of areas that you're of operation. I think because we were the extra platoon in each company, we gave them a great amount of manpower, so they could start tweaking and changing how they did things. Because we fell under the company commander as well. We were independents. So, I mean, a week at Fort George doing Sangers, base security, and Mike Echoes.
Well, if I remember rightly, though, I think it was we did 8 hours camp guard, which was in the Sangers, on the main gate.
Yeah.
And then you did 8 hours patrols.
Yes.
Then 8 hours off.
No, we did Sangers. Then you did QRF for 8 hours.
Oh, and
Search Bay. Then you had 8 hours off. And that was the rota for that week. But also, the platoon was also responsible for Mike Echoes. There was only one team would go down to Stranraer to do the
dress course to the RUC for people don't.
Yeah. So there was that part of that week at Fort George. And then when you did City, you were either based in Masonic or Rosemount.
Which was slightly different to us, because I can't remember offhand, but we did roughly that. You did the 8 hours camp guard.
Yeah.
The 8 hours QRF and search base. And then maybe the next time you did it, I think you did Sangers again, but then you do patrols for 8 hours.
No, because
that's how we did it.
We were just responsible for the base, and the only patrol you would do is Mike Echoes.
Oh, okay, so we did a lot of foot patrols.
No, not Mike Echoes, and also motor base place around the surrounding, because the other platoon would be in the city, split between Masonic, Rosemount, and elsewhere. And then the other platoon was split into 3 on the 3 PVCPs.
One thing that we've both talked about with Roth Mike there was, what strikes you now is we walked from the Peace Bridge, which is based in the centre of the town, to the Foyle Bridge in about half an hour. And when you look at the map, it's striking how small the actual city is.
The AO was big because it got all the rural side up to the border. And when you go east of the city, past Waterside, all the small villages. But the population is obviously very, very tightly massed around the city, and mainly on the western side is the majority of the population, because Waterside is quite small.
Yeah. And that's why we were talking about before. You tend to operate in 2 4-man teams, and each 4-man team was called a brick. So you tend to each in 2 of them made up a multiple. And sometimes you go out for a bit of deception. You stick another team in.
Yeah, and then they go back into base.
An escort patrol and vehicles sort of.
But it wasn't big enough 50 to run through.
It wasn't big enough to get through.
Because sometimes you'd have two teams on the ground, and they put they send out a mobile pair as well, but on the edges of the city, just to provide in-depth for also mutual support. But you couldn't really have 3 4-man teams on the ground because of the way the city was laid out, especially inside the walls. You couldn't go depth, you couldn't go much flanking. Because sometimes when something happened, we'd end up following down the same street because you couldn't there wasn't a parallel street.
Yeah.
And to go round would take so long, you'd never get there.
And you also had a series of watch towers, hangars essentially with optics, that type of thing. And those guys, especially up in the city walls. So we were up there last night. Fantastic views over the Craigie and the bog side.
Yeah, you could do a lot of stuff from there. And they provided the overwatch when you were down there on mobiles and foot and stuff like that, especially when you're going up the Craigie, because going up the Craigie, you're going up a hill, and that, I was saying earlier, that was an absolute nightmare, because if they were throwing rocks at you from the top of the hip road, you could not jog all the way back up. It was just horrendous.
And any time you spent out a Sangha was a bonus, but things like you'd be on QRF, and you have to sit there and your kit ready to go, smelly.
Yeah.
That aroma of the Niba vest when you'd undo your combat jacket, unzip the plates and get that waft coming up.
Yeah, well, I remember in Fort George, you come up to Sangers, you go into the search bay, there's just a line of chairs, and you sit there. The team commanders would have the radios on, monitoring them, and everyone else would be just sat in the chair dozing for 8 hours, and you're hoping that no one brought a vehicle in or a problem in, and you're also hoping as the QRF you didn't get crashed out, because the vehicles were slower. They were slower than anything else on the road. It would take you ages to get anywhere, and once you're crashed out, obviously that was you. Then your 8 hours would turn into, you'd be on the cord and you could be there 10, 12, 15 hours, and by the time you come back in, you might just get a few hours kip before you're back on stag again.
And likewise, if you're supposedly off duty and the QRF gets stepped up, you might get called up to be the next QRF.
But what people do forget is once the QRF went out, other people got stepped up. But the next day, when the Sangers needed stagging on again, if you were still out, the team that was stagging on would continue to stag on. They didn't come off the Sangers after the 8 hours.
Your periods were always interrupted, because we're talking about in Fort George, it was all porter cabins surrounded by blast walls.
Yeah.
And tiny porter cabin rooms with 40 in bunk beds. No bedding, it was all sleeping bags, all your kit in there, in fact, you had a berthing store, if I remember rightly. So it was all your belt kit, your personal kit under the beds. But then you have patrols coming in and out all hours of the day, hit banging against the walls. There's a tannoy there that would be calling for people.
And during the 8 hours off, that's when you have to clear all your systems, weapon systems, it's clean all your electronics, all your equipment.
Do your doorway, your washing.
Someone's going to have to go and you take it in turns. One person will take all the clothes, take it down, start trying to get them washed and dried.
And there was never enough washing machines.
No. And many a time I could come back, it was a little bit damp. And I'd be wearing it back on again the next day on patrol, but it didn't make a difference because I'd be soaking wet by the end anyway. So it was a constant cycle of that, of catch up or never catching up.
And you lived on egg banjos, remember?
Yeah.
Except because the cookhouse used to leave a hot plate going overnight. You come off patrol, make up a load of egg banjos, or you come in the vehicle. One guy was sent to the cookhouse to quickly knock up a load of egg banjos he'd bring out, stick in the vehicle, going back out.
And it was just a constant, you were just constantly fighting fatigue. You were constantly trying to keep on top of your admin.
And then there was the other admin as well, where once a week you'd have to check all your ammunition.
Yeah.
All your patrol aid memoirs.
Yeah. Lay it all out.
You had the old, what do you call it? The terrorist recognition cards, what they call
montage.
Photo montages, all the terrorists, which was basically head and shoulders of the sort of the top 30 naughty boys. And the pipe range for zero.
Yeah, once a month at least. There was never a day off. It was a constant churn of activity.
But I used to like doing all the city patrols, the Mike Echoes and that, because anything together at a Sanger, because unless you've sat for 6 to 8 hours Sanger bashing, it is that's why I've said it before in a podcast. That's why I always don't like seeing animals caged up in zoos, because I know it's a bad analogy, but I know what it's like to be bored and contained like that. It's just
I mean, it was absolutely soul destroying work.
But the Mike Echoes with the RUC were good, because you get into their canteen, scrounge those hot cans. You remember that? The pop tops?
Yeah. And he broke them knotting up as well.
The only trouble with them was their vehicles were better than ours. Well, they were faster anyway. Yeah, struggled to keep up with them at times.
Yeah, it was. There was just challenges all the time. It was every day was a challenge. Every day was another challenge. We're going administration.
So we're getting down now towards Fort George. It's getting a bit noisy, so we'll probably just sign off there just now. But we're going to head up the Strand Road, past the police station, then up towards the walls, and then we're going to head down into the Craigan and the Bogside by the Free Derry Wall. Right, we're back in a hotel now after our day out.
Yeah, so we walked from Fort George back up through the city, past Strand Road police station, which we talked about before and went to. Looked very similar to how it was in the late 80s. No sangers on the corners anymore, which used to be. And traffic is normal. There used to be more calming measures or VCPs outside the police station during peak hours. And then we carried on back into the city up towards the wall. Again, the city, very, very different. A lot of new builds, a lot of new apartments. I didn't recognise a lot of the Strand Road anymore.
We had to orientate ourselves.
Yeah, I think because I always remember that we used to have to race between Strand Road and Fort George because of one of the IAG threats from people throwing items off the high buildings or the high terraces. But all that's gone now, except when you get really close to the city. And then obviously we got back on the city wall again because we wanted to complete the walk around the wall, but also to visit locations such as where the Masonic base was, which is only a small base with a tower overlooking the Bogside.
Super Sanger, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, Super Sanger. And there was a platoon minus probably from there. And it was a place that we used to go to and would use it as a setting off point as well for city patrols and return to, because it's inside the wall, but it dominated the Craigan and the Bogside.
Yeah, great views from up there.
Oh, massive. And you don't realise how good a view, because I never walked the whole of the wall when I was there. It wasn't a done thing, because obviously you were silhouetted as well, mainly in the city or then down the Bogside. From there, we went down to the Bogside to look at the Free Derry Wall and some of the memorials that are still there. Some of the buildings, the old buildings, the Rossville Flats have gone now, which we were doing my tour, but not during Collins.
So there's a Bogside then, which was a famous pub known as the Bog. And I've got a really great photograph of us going past it in either a Macron Land Rover or a Snacks Land Rover with the Bogside in. I was hoping to go around there, maybe even going for a drink, but it was demolished about 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of changes, a lot of new builds. Interesting to see. A lot of the old memorials are still in place, and some of that's going to be for the tourists as well as for the memories. I've got to say I'm a little bit disappointed on the memorial, because it was iconic to me as much as it is to people living there. They put other bits and pieces on there, and I believe over the years they've changed the background, the colours, and they've added other elements. And I think actually it needs to stay as a bit more pure.
And that's because they've put a load of Palestinian support on it.
And I think in the past, because I was looking through Google, and they've done rainbow colours and all the other stuff, so it became a wall to use for various
causes.
Causes. But I just think that it waters down what it was. And when it was done I think it was 1968 or 69 when it was done originally, and why it should be kept. And then finally, and I think if there are people that live there and are part of the committee, you've got to get rid of the advertisement board at the back.
With Santa on it.
Yeah, well, I just think it minimises and actually detracts from it. And actually, I think memorials, whether you agree with them or not, have to be kept to a high standard. And there was graffiti on this one as well, and I really found that difficult.
Well, the thing is about that is, for most people associate the start of the Troubles with Londonderry.
And I think that's the reason why it has to be more purist.
And then Yeah, you're right. And but I suppose they're writing their own history there. But around that point, again, that history is made because you had the Rossville flats there where Bloody Sunday took place.
Yes.
And again, that was a huge influence. The reason that Free Derry Wall was there was the fact that marked the start of what was called Free Derry, where they had basically isolated themselves from the rest of the city. And it took a huge, they had armed barricades to prevent people going in. And it took a huge, I think it was Operation Mortarman.
Yeah,
to clear it out.
I mean, it was a big statement piece, and I think to keep it as part of the history, and to keep that history relevant and as important as it should be, you've got to look after your memorials better, and that's just my view. And I don't live there,
but that's our point. We will keep going back to that's our point of view, and that's the Palestinian cause. But I suppose you've got to realise that the IRA and the other Republican groups have always had associations with it. Yeah. I'm sure they sent people to training camps with them back in the day as well. Yeah, it's interesting. And then we went up to, was part of going around the walls, we went up to the Fountain, which is a little Protestant enclave.
Yeah.
Which we can hardly recognise at all. There was a mural there that I took a photograph of when I was there in 88, 89. But that's the words are still the same, but it's been moved. I couldn't even get any orientation. Right?
No, I think it very much that area. There's a new school there and some playing fields that weren't there when obviously in the 80s. It's massively changed. But it's just interesting that enclave still exists in a form, but nowhere near as prominent as it did in the 80s. And I think that's just part of that regeneration and gentrification of the city. They're knocking down some of their old stuff, and it's really interesting to see, and the changes that are coming, and the changes you can see will come. Some of those old streets, the houses are dilapidated. They will get knocked down eventually, and the gentrification just outside the wall will happen, and the city is just going to prosper even more.
But like the Republicans, so down in the Craig and the Bog side, they've got the Bloody Sunday mural on a wall. They've got the kid with the respirator on, which is quite iconic.
Yeah.
And they've got the Derry women banging the dustbins on. Then you go up to the Fountain, and they've got similar type murals.
Yeah.
They've got memorials to the killed UDA and UVF fighters as well.
Yeah.
So both communities are still keeping these things alive.
Yeah.
But as you said, I think it's weird because are they there to commemorate as well as they become like
tourist attraction?
Terrorism is tourism, isn't it?
You have to keep, again, this comes down to memorials. The memorials down in the bog side, the big ones on the side of the houses, look fairly well kept. And they do draw tourists in as well.
We saw people today doing tours, people walking around speaking foreign languages.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think people should do that as well, because we do that on any campaigns and all the rest of it. There are always memorials of one type or another. And this is their memorials that the nationalists or Republicans are using and what the unionists are using. Just got to look after them. We've got to look.
Yeah,
looked after.
I think what's strange for me as well is we took a photograph of me today at roughly the same spot that I've got a photograph of me with a rifle and uniform, obviously. And we've got the Free Derry Wall in the background. And that photograph was taken probably in 89, early part of 89.
Yeah.
And it's weird to A, be back here all those years later, but B, we often talk about where we sold out when the Good Friday Agreement was signed. But the more I come back to Northern Ireland and the more I walk round, we made some horrendous compromises with terrorists. But when we've said this constantly during these recordings, when you see what's happening and how Londonderry appears to be thriving, yes, it's still a work in progress, and yes, it's got some rough bits too. But when we're talking to the girl in reception tonight, whose mum remembers the Troubles very well, she wasn't told anything about them growing up, and she barely remembers them.
Yeah.
I think, was it a price worth paying? Well, I think the answer has to be yes. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I think we talked about this today. In 20 years' time, the city will have changed massively. The democratic, the makeup of the community will not only be people who are born here, but people who have immigrated here, second generation as well. So they won't feel that same historical tie. And the city, if it continues to prosper in the way it's doing, will again in 10 years' time be unrecognisable to what it is today, and in 20 years' time it'll be unrecognisable. and some of the old estates and some of the old names would have gone, some of the old housing stock, which then changes the dynamics of that potential, that population. And the very staunch elements of both the nationalist Republican side and the Unionist side will also dissipate. There'll always be some, there'll always be those few, and they'll carry it on generation to generation. But it was such a minority that people will be looking forward, they'll be looking, the challenges of the new world will be the green challenge, economic challenge,
unification.
Yeah, and all that, and I don't think the unification will be such a big discussion point as it is today in 20 years' time, because the world will change again and the people are changing massively. And we talked about this before, but people are more interested in what the green threat's going to be in 20, 30 years' time rather than other threats.
Well, the other thing is, when you see how far Londonderry's come on in 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
From when I did my tour and you did your tour in the late 80s, there is no way people are going to allow this to go back. I think we said that more early in one of our recordings when we came out here, because nobody's going to put up with that anymore.
No, well, the city's different. I mean, the amount of hotels in the city are unbelievable.
Even bed and breakfast down in the Craig and the Bog side.
You can do all sorts nowadays. It's unbelievable. But the amount of hotels around the city centre have been built because there's commerce and there's people coming here. You turn all that off tomorrow, you turn off all the tourism tomorrow, this city will crumble. And all those people who are relying on those employments will be the ones that will raise up and push back against any extremism.
But it's interesting how snippets of the Troubles are still there. So we walked past an antique shop and you noticed there was a rubber bullet, the pointed early rubber bullets in there, up for sale. And it was funny, when we went to the Tower Museum later on, there was some facts in there. So that early rubber bullet, which had it was black and had a pointed end, they were used between 1970 and 75. And there was 55,854 of them fired over that period. And then they were later replaced with the ones that we knew, which were used by the FRG and later on the Hitler and Koch riot guns, which had the blunt end. And that was in use between 73 and 2005, and 125,000 of them were used, which equated to roughly 10 a day. And over that period, plastic and rubber bullets caused 17 deaths. So you don't see a lot of non-lethal stuff like plastic bullets. It's still weird that they're acceptable here, but you could never use them in the mainland, because I'm sure they use rubber bullets in the continent, don't they? Do they use them in the continent?
They use what's called water cannons more on the continent. I don't know, to be honest. I don't know how it was more acceptable over here. I think it was just of the time.
Well, yeah, because the violence was so
and the rioting was.
I know police forces in the UK have them in their armories.
They got them, but they have to be signed off so high before they're allowed to use them. But I think it's just it over here, the rioting, the numbers in the riots, and it wasn't a short riot. These riots were.
Well, also you needed an interim between that and 762 and 556.
Yeah, but again, we haven't got that on the mainland.
Yeah, true. But then again, you weren't seeing. When you say that, you look at some of the Toxteth riots and all that happened in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just as serious as what you saw over here.
You could ask the question about the miners' riots.
Yeah,
but I think it
again, you wouldn't do that
unpalatable on the mainland because of the
police wouldn't be allowed to. You wouldn't be able to see it letting the miners strike. Police been riding down miners and horses and back. Yeah, I doubt you'd see that level of violence again. I think
it was of the time as well. But I think it was just because in the 60s it had already started off that we were using rubber bullets, so the RUC and such like at that time, and then it escalated. The British Army come over, and that sort of tactic was continued because it wasn't something that the British Army had used anywhere else. We didn't have rubber bullets in any other locality. It was definitely a Northern Ireland thing.
But the reason that was there, we shouldn't forget, is just we were reminiscing about the threats. So when we came out here, the big threats were IAGs, improvised anti-armour grenades, And they were just basically, they looked like a German, much bigger, but a German World War II stick grenade with a shaped charge in the front. And they had like what was known as a drogue parachute, didn't they?
Yeah.
They would throw these sort of horizontally, and the parachute would help them strike the side of the wagon at the right angle, or they drop them as well, didn't they? From flyovers and buildings.
It stabilised so they drop onto the top of the wagon to penetrate the wagon.
RPGs.
Yeah.
All manners of weapons.
Yeah.
Soviet armour.
Anything they could get their hand on, really.
Yeah, and a lot of those shipments were coming in from Libya, which we've discussed in the podcast before. Petrol bombs, acid bombs. There was the Prig as well.
Yeah, Prigs.
Which was based on an improvised rocket launcher, wasn't it?
Yeah, a homemade sort of thing. They've been used. Obviously, it was mortars as well. Homemade mortars have been used as well.
Nail bombs.
Yeah, there was. I mean, every device they could think of. There was nothing new that people are facing in later campaigns that weren't already used here. IEDs were just called other things.
Yeah, I know. Here we had. Funny enough, I think I mentioned the other day there's an IED set in this street we're on now. I'm pretty sure of it. But you have same as you get all around the world now. Command wire IEDs.
Yeah.
Remote controlled IEDs. They had years ago. You used to be able to get those parking timer things.
Yes.
Which was you'd turn it, set it for 30 minutes, that type of thing. Video recorder timers. I think it was a video recorder timer that was used in Brighton to blow up the Grand Hotel that Thatcher was in.
Again, it's the technology at the time was used to initiate explosions. Command wire, because obviously mobile phones in 1988 wasn't around. But there was remote control because there was other devices that were used remote control. Command wire's a favourite as well because they could actually control it, and it was harder for us to find a command wire and to intercept. I think the imagination of the opposition was whatever they could get their hand on, how could they convert that into a device, big, small, or whatever it was going to be, and how to initiate it. It was not restricted by. It was aided by all the technology of the day.
And it was a command wire that killed Stephen Amell on the Buncrana Road. And if I remember rightly, that command wire was hundreds of meters long, and they set it up beyond some. So they had playing fields between the road and the firing point, and they used the rugby posts as aiming markers.
Yeah.
And the command wire down, they had the ID set up that they could use these posts as aiming markers. And they were very, very effective as they'd killed Stephen Amell and seriously injured about 4 or 5 other guys.
Yeah, I think you didn't underestimate the opposition. You underestimated your peril. And you didn't overestimate your capabilities because you were always on the back foot, because you were always reacting. And very rarely was we proactive because of the intelligence gaps, and it was just the nature of the beast of the tours, as it were, because you're out every day and you took a chance every day as well.
And then we finished off the day with a couple of pints, but then we went to the Tower Museum, which I highly recommend when we come to Londonderry.
Yeah.
Just want to go over what we saw in there, mate?
It's historic. It talks about obviously the start of the city as it was from various invasions, but also about the city of London got involved in the 1600s into the plantation, which is the county of Londonderry, and then took over the old city, and started to rebuild it.
But you could see though from that museum, because you're walking through the rooms and you go through a timeline and you can see it building up, and it goes. By the time you get to the 20th century, you've got all the Catholics being refused votes because they weren't allowed to have houses, and you had to have a house to vote at the time. That was gerrymandering the vote, and you could see, and it all led up to that day in 1968 or 69 when those civil rights marches took place.
Well, I didn't realise that the Protestant side of the community was trying to get a partition in 1833 to have the North as a Protestant-led government to allow the Catholic side to be in the South. So it is a complex, and to be honest, if anyone understands Irish history, no one does, because it's so layered. In the 30 years since we were asked over here, have been amazing, and I think if you want a nice weekend, this is definitely a city to come.
I think it's been quite cathartic.
Yeah.
For me, in some respects, because I think too often the Army's got a bad reputation for what it did in Northern Ireland. But said this countless times during the podcast series, there are very few armies in the world that could have conducted themselves as well against all the stresses and strains that the British Army faced over a period of, 30 plus years of the Troubles.
Yeah, I think we underestimate how complex it was internally as well. Even amongst their own communities, within the Unionist community and the Nationalist community, how complex it was. There was competing factions all over. So there was, a number of people wanted to find compromise and find a way out of this. But within their own communities, they weren't able to do it. And that's on both sides. And that continued, adding that an extra layer of how do you appease everybody? You can't. How do you appease the majority? Very difficult.
Well, everybody had to make compromises.
Yeah, I think that's probably the piece, going back to what you said. Everybody had to make compromise for the peace deal. So it's not one side that made more than others. Everyone had to. And I think we don't see it because we also only see it from our perspective. We don't see it from every other's perspective that everybody had to compromise. Everyone had to give up something to take it to the next step and allow it to settle and then slowly try and move forward. But it's very easy to say that one side compromised more. I don't think so. I think everyone had to.
You got to let it go. And to just walk around here today's proved that. So we're going out for Scruff in a minute. Kev's choice tonight, so I don't know what he's picking there. But tomorrow we're going rural. We go down to South Armagh, Besbrook, Cady, a couple of places like that, and we'll record our thoughts there. But that's it for the night. Okay, so we're back in Belfast tonight after our road trip. Today we spent driving round South Armagh. We went down to Cady first, which the remnants of the base are still there. They've got the high metal fence, but it looks to be empty inside.
Yeah, the perimeter and the old cameras are still there. But there's a for sale sign on the outside.
Yeah.
So obviously they're trying to sell off that piece of land and obviously the old foundations and stuff. Because it'll take some clearing because the concrete wall will be quite thick and there'll be all sorts of bits and pieces inside which will be expensive to remove.
And in a town like that, there won't be much.
No, because
you can't see much use for it because there's plenty of other real estate. And as you said, in Turkey, already all that concrete.
Yeah, and I think also, as much as we think it's a big base, it's not really a big space. And if you want to use it as an industrial sort of unit sort of thing, that'd be fine, or a parking area. But you've got to have the business in that area.
Yeah, it didn't appear to.
And I don't think so.
I always remember in there, though, and other people there in the sort of early 90s remember, there was a small Jack Russell used to live in the base called Tripod because it only had 3 legs. It had been struck by a car, and the soldiers sort of adopted it. It lived in the main gate sire, and it would go out on patrol with you. And if you wanted to get picked up by a helicopter, it didn't like helicopters, so it wouldn't go in the helicopter, and it would make its way back to the gate and sit at the bottom of the 2 big main gates and just look up at the CCTV camera. And the lads would see it, let it in, dry it down. It used to sleep under the banks, the CCTV camera banks that they had, the sort of where the gubbins of the CCTV was. It used to sleep under there, get some scran and be ready to go out in the next patrol when they had rifles being cocked and readied at the loading bay. So then we went to Besbrook, which was the busiest helipad in Europe at one time. And Besbrook's massive. It's an old mill. It was established in 1620, and the army took it over in the early 70s, and it closed in 2007. And that's broadly unchanged, wasn't it?
Yeah, there are some parts of it which look like it's been taken over by industrial units from the gates and some of the areas. So it has been compartmentalised off a little bit. And the mill itself is obviously in ruins now. And I think you mentioned that there are aspirations to convert it. But I think it's a massive project. Be a lot of work to clean that space out and then convert it. And again, it's about the area. Has the area got the capacity that if you did do a conversion to apartments and whatever?
Well, that conversion was talked about when I Googled it. It was last been talked about in August 23 when they were putting planning permission through.
Yeah.
And the proposal was for a 60 million redevelopment consisting of 214 flats and 58 houses with some offices and business areas and a gym.
Yeah, I mean, it looked great if they did. And obviously, the town of Besbrook would change completely with that sort of infra coming in.
But it sounded like it was looking all right, wouldn't it?
It was doing okay. I mean, again, when we walked around and drove up to the high ground and such like, absolutely.
But Keady looked a bit down on it.
Keady did, but I think it always will do because there's not that much regeneration in that area. And I mean, Keady's tiny in comparison to Besbrook as well as a town. But I think Besbrook is a lot of money, 60 mil. You'd have to have some government funding to encourage someone to come in and do that development. And it's whether it's close enough to work for a lot of people to sell 250 apartments.
Yeah, that's a lot in the middle of nowhere. An interesting thing about Besbrook is it was where the last soldier killed in the Troubles was, and that was Lance Bombardier Stephen Restrick, who was shot by the so-called IRA sniper team on the 12th of February 1997. And actually, it's a sort of a sad tale for the Royal Artillery there because both the first and last soldiers killed during the Troubles were from the Royal Artillery. And the first one killed was Gunner Robert Curtis, who was shot dead in New Lodge in Belfast on the 6th of February 1971. And we've talked about, Kev, about the price paid for peace. And I think Stephen Restrick's killer underlines that piece in a lot of respects because he was found guilty of multiple murders and bomb plots and he was sentenced to a total of 490 years. But he was released under the GFA, the Good Friday Agreement, after serving 16 months.
Mm.
And that is one of those hard things you've got to swallow.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think it'll never be easy for people to accept that.
Especially the parents.
And it shouldn't be.
No.
But I think this is what we talked about yesterday. There has to be massive compromises on all sides because, because people were killed by the different factions. So from the Unionist factions, by the Republican factions, killing each other as well as killing soldiers, prison officers. But people forget how many prison officers were killed.
Yeah, we're talking about
it. And they were at a massive risk, not only when they were out off duty, but when they were on duty. We've got to imagine a prison is almost like a mini town and you're constantly under threat when you work in that environment. It can't be underestimated about the prison service. I think it's something that people forget about is these people were working inside an environment which had all of these individuals in there and potentially they were always outnumbered.
Yeah. But I think the raw open wound is when they're still dragging soldiers through courts.
Yes.
And I think, for me, that does need to stop. You can maybe swallow all that stuff we just talked about, but when they're dragging soldiers through courts, that really annoys me. Then we went from there to Armagh, and I was never in Armagh, but you were.
Yeah.
Actually, a lot of the infrastructure is still there and occupied by the looks of it.
Well, the police station and the
Grand Barrett
station, they're all still in operation as well. But as I said to you, it hasn't changed that much. There was some new stuff.
You always thought it was quite an affluent place when you were there.
Affluent when I was there, well-to-do, very clean even then. Obviously, it didn't have the range of shops that it does now and all the other aspects. But the main parts were already there. And it was only a small place because it's a cathedral city. But actually, it's just a large market town in real terms. But, there was a massive police presence there. There was a massive military presence there as well. We were up in the Drummer Barracks, I think it was at the time, if we got that right. So we were based there. There was UDR based there. There was 2 UDR was based there as well. So it was a massive presence. But our AO was big. And it was very often that we went and reinforced other AOs as well.
And it's interesting when we were driving around, there was an absence of tricolours and certainly no sniper at work signs, which we need to be everywhere as propaganda. But can you just tell listeners your theory on when you know Northern Ireland has moved into a peaceful state? And I think
remember that.
You'd know.
I think it was
the three things that are like.
I think when I won't say normality has come to town, but when things are starting to normalise, when the Turkish barbershops are popping up everywhere, the nail bars, we see nail bars now in all of the major cities, but the Turkish,
and even in the smaller places will be so.
And obviously the hand car washes, which, as we all know, is all part of the hidden economy. And I think I said to you, when you've got more Turkish barbershops and Sinn Féin offices, things have changed.
And I think, I love that you said that today. And I think on that, we'll finish this recording. And we're going to go back, we're going to let it settle for a little bit. And in a week's time, we're going to record a conclusion, which we'll tack on to the end of all these little chats that we've had. So we'll leave you for now, and Kevin and I'll sort that out when we get back to the UK. I've made a mistake there. We're in the UK. Somebody's going to not like that when we get back to England.
So, Colin, it's been a week or so since we come back from Northern Ireland, and one of my suggestions was we didn't do the conclusion straight away, that we have it's got a reflection. That's a very 21st century sort of view to this. But I think before we conclude on what we saw and the changes, and we have talked about that, I think I want to go back a couple of weeks before it. How did you feel as we got closer to the trip and you were going to go back to places that you served in? And so your memory is going to be the late 80s. It's not going to be how we saw it. And, you had like I said to you during the trip, you had a more difficult tour. And I don't make this light that we only had injured people, but you had people who were killed and people you knew that were killed. And that is always going to be difficult, I think.
I think it'd been something I'd wanted to do for a while. And then when we started talking about it quite a few months ago, and it became, I don't think I would have went unless you went with me. Because I think I needed somebody to talk to about what the experiences were like and compare and contrast in some way. But I knew the outcome was going to be one of two things, I think. In that I'd go over there and I'd come back a little bit bitter and twisted, or I'd come back with a sense of, I don't know, I think we alluded to it in the podcast, that we achieved something, and maybe Steve and Amo and the other soldiers that get killed and policemen that get killed and warders that get killed over there, perhaps maybe they didn't die in vain. So I knew those were going to be the two outcomes, and I was probably a bit afraid of what the overall impression would be, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I think we spoke about this again as we were going around. Sometimes when we recorded, so a lot of time when we weren't and we're just chatting. It's like going back in a time machine, because our memories are locked to a period of time, and we don't live there, so we don't see the changes on a day-to-day basis, or even through the decades. We've both been back there for work purposes, and you've gone on a trip there as well. But it's different, I think, because it wasn't going over the old stomping ground as such. I think for me, I have a different view of Northern Ireland anyway, and my background's slightly different to yours, so I have a different viewpoint on a lot of stuff. I think one of the advantages I think we had when we served over there in the late 80s, I'd say the British Army had sorted itself out from non-trained soldiers when they first went in, trying to find, the working model. By the time we got to do our Northern Ireland training, the model was actually very mature, great direction. And people might not think that, but it was.
It's probably the best treatment I ever had.
Best training, but we were also, I think when we got there, we didn't have the the perceived biases that perhaps everyone used to say, oh, well, the British Army side and one side or the other. I don't believe it. I didn't see it during my tour. We were very much in the middle. We were there trying to make things better for everyone else. And I think that was the feeling I had. And during my 2 tours, I think you're only making a tiny contribution towards that next phase, but I think everyone did. And I think it was like when we talked about the referendum, post the peace talks, and Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland both voted separately on the agreement, and the numbers that signed up to it to give themselves a chance for a new direction. And we talked about this when we were in the museum in Derry about this as well, and how actually we helped that stabilisation of peace. And people can't always see it in their short tours, but you help stabilise a tiny bit to help it move to that next slow turn of the cog.
I am glad that you said, let's leave it a week before we had this part of the conversation that will feature at the end of the podcast, because when we left and we're on the ferry and we're travelling back in the car, it was a very positive frame of mind. But this is what Northern Ireland does to you, because I've started putting all the recordings together. And then I started questioning some of the conclusions I came to during those podcasts. It's like, for example, was I actually looking at it through rose-tinted glasses just to make myself feel better? And part of that was over the last couple of days, whereby the new government has kicked out the Legacy Act, and people are still going to get hauled before courts. And today, there's a former parachute regiment soldier being charged with 2 murders and 5 attempted murders, and it ties back into that conversation we had about people had to make sacrifices. So I definitely do feel better, and I persuaded myself that I feel better, but then I start to see soldiers being hauled through courts. I'm not trying to legitimise Bloody Sunday or anything like that, and it just makes me feel very uncomfortable that these soldiers are getting hauled through courts when, as part of the Good Friday Agreement, people like that guy who killed Lance Bombardier Stephen Restrick walked free after 6 months. I find that is now, after 1 week, I find it really hard to reconcile that if I'm explaining myself correctly there.
Yeah, but I think for me, it's looking at the whole picture. And I think the fact that there isn't bombs in the city anymore.
And that's the main thing I'm aware of, is it? And those people, and that young girl, that young woman we talked to at the hotel, who only knew about the troubles through her parents.
And unfortunately, there'll always be legacy cases. There'll always be inquiries, as we know. There's inquiries going on at the moment. And, we've still got inquiries going on about the Birmingham 21, which is the early 70s as well. It's not over, but I think if we look at it in a bigger, you look wide and look at the whole picture, we don't have troops on the streets anymore with SLRs, armoured vehicles. We don't have those military checkpoints everywhere. We don't have Gulf towers and all the rest of it. It has moved so far forward. It's become a destination rather than... But the legacy stuff will always be there, unfortunately. And I think there was legacy stuff still going on from all conflicts.
And that's why I need to...
And there's always going to be...
Yeah. Sorry, that's why I need to have these conversations with you, because you balance me out. And before we were coming on to this podcast, we had a discussion about the Birmingham pub bombings. Some very close to you, because that's the city you're from. And to me, we have talked throughout the Northern Ireland podcast about how sometimes we have lost the narrative and Sinn Féin are writing that narrative. I mean, what happened to Birmingham 6 was absolutely atrocious. They were fitted up essentially. Well, they were fitted up by the police. But a couple of weeks ago, there was relatives of the 21 people who were killed in the Birmingham pub bombings. And I think you said tonight there was roughly 200 people with serious, often life-changing injuries. Again, these people are being forgotten about. It's And again, these are things that when we had that conversation we had in the podcast about people having to make compromises, they're very big compromises. But if they can give
massive. I mean, we've got to remember when we start looking at like any war, World War II, a lot of things changed in the 60s, and we talked about this last time, where soldiers in the early 60s and the 50s, a few years before, were fighting in Germany. 10 years later, they're marrying a German girl. But there's still going to be elements that are never going to accept each side, and some of the things that happened. Exactly the same with the Japanese and some of the places they had invaded. And I think there's never ever going to be anything clean cut.
No.
I don't think it'll ever be, we can draw a line, because there's always something bubbling away somewhere. There's always another inquiry, because that's the world we live in as well. There's always going to be court cases getting pulled forward because of evidence that might just appear or just come to the surface. I don't think it'll ever be clean.
No.
Because it wasn't, I think it's fair to say, it was a very complex operation. It was a very long operation. Lots of mistakes were made by all the sides. Lots of good things were done. Like I say, I think in the late 80s, the balance of the soldiers on the ground, the training we had, and try to move things forward and keep the peace and suppress the terrorists on both sides. I think we were more balanced in doing that. And in the early 90s, that was even more so. So my tour in the 90s was very different to the tour in the late 80s. And again, I saw those changes. And I saw those changes not only with us, but I also saw it with the police as well.
I think
and the communities.
I think for me, bottom line is, I'm still the same impression that I had last week, in that I feel better for seeing how it is.
Yeah.
I realise now that there's always going to be things that are going to get me angry, like coming back and finding out the Legacy Act getting banned and soldiers being hauled through the courts. But that is, for me, that's easy for me to compromise, but those individual soldiers are going to have to carry that burden. And
yeah.
So it's okay for me to say, I'm happy for the compromises, but if you're a soldier hauled into the court, those compromises can have very real effects on you.
There's 3,500 people that were murdered or killed during the Troubles. So there's 3,500 families who are also struggling.
They're looking for answers.
Absolutely, because a lot of them haven't got the person that killed their relative or their father or their mother or someone else. So I think this is the problem. But Northern Ireland campaign was far more complex than we all realised. I think at the beginning no one thought it'd be so complex, but it really got complex with the layers of politics and all those issues. No one really understands it as well as they should do.
Well, it's interesting because when I got back, I posted up some various stuff about the trip and some old photographs I had about my time in Derry. And it was quite interesting to see some of the replies I was getting back. And some of the replies were saying that, well done, mate. I don't think I could do what you've done by going over there. And I've replied to some of these guys and said, look, if you can, I would go, because I think you'll get more out of it than you think. And I think that would probably be my final word. I got more out of it than not going in. It certainly laid some, I wouldn't say demons, that's lit too, but you know what I mean? It laid some, it laid some things to rest for me.
Like I say, I think the challenge is always, when you're looking at your old tours, you're looking at in the when you were a lot younger, and my tour in 1988, that's how I think about it. So when my reference point to that part,
only a 20
Northern Ireland was still 1988. So I've got a time machine goes back, going to there, this time, unrecognisable. And I've said that throughout, both Belfast, Derry, and Armagh, and some of the other places, unrecognisable. Walking round, not looking over my shoulder. There's no fear. There's no tension. People are just getting on with their lives. that is such a leap forward from what I saw. And I don't think it's really hard to express that, that the 30 years, the difference is unimaginable. Because I could never have foreseen Belfast the way it was last week when I was there in the early 90s. It was just unrecognisable.
Yeah, no, totally, mate.
And I think, there's going to be road bumps, there's speed bumps all the way through to the end of our lives regarding that campaign. The campaign went on from, late 60s to the mid 70s, mid 2000s. I mean, it's a long, long campaign. And people are still looking for answers, like we talked about the Birmingham 21. They're still looking for answers. And I remember that in 1972, I think it was, 72, 73. So I remember that. That just gives away my age a little.
You're not young.
What? But I'm young, the sort of numbers. But I remember that then. And I remember the heartache then. And I remember on the anniversaries, every year, Birmingham commemorated it. And they've had various people come over from the Irish president and all the rest of it come to Birmingham to commemorate that event. Yeah. And they've built commemorative pieces that are in the news every year. They're trying, and they're still seeking answers. And I think that'll never go away for them. Even if they get the answer, it probably will always be there. Because some of these people have now died, so they'll never get the answers they want. They'll never be able to hear from the people why they did it. No one's ever going to take ownership of that at all because of the atrocity it was.
I think really to sort of finish off from my end, if MD is listening to this part of the podcast and expecting me to give a clear answer, probably reflects the situation on arm for us. My answer wasn't clear there. It's still very mixed emotions, but at the end of the day, my experience the other week there was positive.
And I think the important thing as an individual is, did you think you made a difference?
Absolutely.
And did you see that difference?
Yeah.
And that's the important part, that your time there with your friends, the sacrifices made in that little group that you knew, was it worth it? Well, I personally think it was, because I've seen peace now. I
totally agree with that statement, because you can. It's not like the lads that fought in Afghanistan. You know what I mean? We went over there last week and we saw tangible progress. It was a normal place.
Yeah.
It was not a normal place when we were there.
No, and you couldn't have had the conversations you had with people 30 years ago.
Well, it's funny because my wife was saying, when you're talking to the locals, what did you say? And I said, me and Kev sort of fudged it. And I said, but no doubt. But the lady that served us our breakfast in the morning, she's going, she'll be going back to the chef going, there's a couple of old soldiers in there reliving their youth.
Absolutely. And I suppose there's I won't say a pilgrimage, but I imagine there's loads and loads of ex-soldiers that go over there. And not forgetting, a lot of ex-soldiers married ladies from Northern Ireland. So they go back there on a regular basis anyway, sort of thing. So I think, I think you've got to take the experience as a personal experience. If you get bored up in the politics of today, you get bored up in every single thing that's going on, unfortunately. Some bits will always say that's more personal because of that tour and some of the agreements. But from a personal point of view, I think I'm glad I went back on a site like a tourism bit, not as work. And I'm glad I went back to some of the same ground that I seem to just run around all day in, seeing stuff that I don't remember seeing. But the changes, the people, the whole package now, unrecognisable in a positive way.
That's it for another episode. Thanks for your continued support and listening in. And please keep your suggestions coming, and our email and social media links are at the bottom of the show notes. You can find us on all the usual suspects, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. If you've downloaded us from iTunes, like the pod, it'd be great if you could leave us a review there or anywhere you get your podcast from. Thanks again to Nick Beale for his continuing help and offering technical support for his company ISAR, and we'll see you in 2025 on The Unconventional Soldier.